Hello, and thanks for tuning in to World Update from M Compass Media. I'm your host, Finbar Markey. Every week I'm joined by John Moran to look at international news that you don't see on TV, or maybe that isn't getting a fair and a balanced hearing in mainstream media. Thanks for joining us again this week, John.
Thanks, Finbar.
What have you got first in terms of international news?
Another busy week. Israel coming apart again. More than 15 Palestinians killed in Gaza, including 3 commanders of the militant group Islamic Jihad, have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Palestinian health officials said 8 women and children were among the dead. Another 22 people were injured. Israel said the Islamic Jihad leaders it targeted overnight were involved in recent attacks on Israeli civilians. Islamic Jihad has vowed revenge, and Gaza-based militants are expected to respond with rocket fire into Israel. Syria comes home. Arab League member states have agreed to reinstate Syria's membership after its suspension 12 years ago, said a statement issued by the bloc after a meeting on Sunday in Cairo, which experts see as a landmark event amid a series of progressive steps towards reconciliation and the waning influence of the US in the Middle East. After having its membership revoked in 2011, Syria's decade of regional isolation has been effectively ended in defiance of US warnings, as the Arab League voted for the country's return into the 22-nation bloc in Cairo ahead of Heads of State Summit, which takes place in Riyadh next week. Decision may be formalized at the summit in Riyadh. The sun never sets on NATO's empire. Japan is in talks to open a NATO liaison office, the first of its kind in Asia, the country's foreign minister told CNN in an exclusive interview on Wednesday, saying Russia's invasion of Ukraine had made the world less stable. We are already in discussions, but no details have been finalized yet, Foreign Minister Yoshimasa Hayashi said on Wednesday, speaking a week ahead of the Group 7 summit, hosted this year by Japan in Hiroshima. Pakistani Supreme Court rules Khan arrest illegal. Pakistan's Supreme Court ruled that former Premier Imran Khan's arrest by the anti-graft agency was illegal and ordered for the ex-cricket star to be freed from custody, a dramatic about-turn in the ongoing political drama. Khan was presented before the top court that's heard an appeal against his arrest, which has fueled countrywide protests. Security officials were stationed around the court complex, and Khan's party has told supporters to stay away. Violence continued to erupt in Pakistan after the arrest, with the death toll rising to 9 and the military deployed across the country. Overnight, 2 more leaders from Khan's Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI) party were arrested, a PTI spokesman, Fahma Chaudhry, has said. He was arrested late on Wednesday night, despite having obtained protective bail from the courts, and early on Thursday, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who served as foreign minister in Khan's cabinet, was picked up by the police. PTI's former finance minister, Ashad Umar, was arrested on Wednesday. Khan's popularity has soared since he was removed as prime minister in April last year, and he has regularly mobilized protests across the country to demand an early election and that military's removal from politics. Progress in Sudan's peace talks despite clashes. The UN on Thursday urged countries with influence in Africa to help end the conflict in Sudan after reported progress in truce talks between the army and the rival paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Clashes rocked Haifa, an entry port to the capital, early on Thursday as residents heard warplanes circling over Khartoum and its adjoining sister cities of Bahri and Omdurman, but the fighting appeared calmer than on Wednesday. In public, neither side has shown that it is ready to offer concessions to end the conflict that erupted suddenly last month, threatening to pinch Sudan into civil war, killing hundreds of people and triggering a humanitarian crisis. Finally, a French reporter has been killed near Bakhmut. Agency France Press has reported the death of its journalist Armand Soldan near Bakhmut in Donetsk, Donbass. According to the agency, the journalist died as a result of shelling on the outskirts of the town of Chaziv Yar, not far from Artyomovsk. We salute Armand's bravery and professionalism, going to the places where few Western journalists bother going to and bringing back invaluable eyewitness accounts.
Thanks for that, John. It's rare to see a journalist going to the front lines and reporting, where an authentic journalist going to the front lines to report. You have I've noticed a lot of US journalists have been caught out pretending to be in the front lines in Ukraine when they're way back in nice comfortable zones where there's no war happening. What's your feelings on this loss of life? There's so much loss of life, but when it's somebody who volunteered to go there to report the truth, it's particularly poignant, isn't it?
It is. Well, I can respond as a human being, and I can respond as a journalist. And as a human being, I think the world has lost a great man, a great reporter, someone who was willing to put his neck on the line to bring the truth to people and went to places that nobody else would go to. For that, he deserves our eternal credit. I'm fed up to my back teeth with listening to so-called experts and journalists reporting from Kiev about what's going on in the rest of the country. Kiev is a million miles from any of the real tension that's going on or the real warfare that's going on. Simply going to Kiev so that you can say you're posting from Ukraine is a cop-out.
It really is, isn't it? Another story that you touched upon there, John, was NATO's expansion. This is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's expansion to Japan, of all places. What the hell is this more preparing for war with China, John?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's outrageous.
We have a representative from the Pan-African League that we're going to show a video from now, and she is making quite a comical point in many ways, but still a very real and genuine point about the fact that the United States held a conference in Zambia for African leaders about democracy and freedom. And it was really a conference about isolating Chinese influence in Africa, or trying to stop it. And this particular member, I will get her name in a wee minute, but she was making the point that the Americans came and they hired a Chinese-built conference center, and they flew into a Chinese-built airport in Zambia, built by the Chinese as a show of friendship to Zambia and to Africa, as they do right across Africa, and that the Americans had the cheek to come and tell them not to have relationships with China. We'll have a look at this video and we'll come back in 1 minute.
If you look at the Western and the imperialist countries, they come with their own interests. The vice president of the US came to Zambia, landed at a Chinese-built airport in Zambia, moved on a Chinese-built road in Zambia. The venue of this summit was actually a gift to Zambia by the Chinese government. And that was where this Summit for Democracy was held, in Zambia.
To tell African people don't work with China.
Right. And the key agenda of this summit was to curb Africa's cooperation with China in a Chinese gift to the African continent. One of our major referral hospitals in Zambia, which is called Levi Mwanawasa Teaching Hospital, was a gift to the Zambian people by China. But even in Zambia, very few people know that this hospital was a gift. Zambia did not pay $1 for that hospital. If you went and saw the little placard that says gift from the Chinese people, It's the size of an A4 sheet of paper. And this is a massive hospital that deals with over 2,600 referral cases a month. But China is so humble in the way they deal with us on the African continent. If this was an American gift, it would be reported in media from the US to Latin America to Europe to Australia. The whole world would know about this gift to the African continent.
What do you make of that, John? Bit of hypocrisy or a bit of something from the United States. Irony, I don't know what it is.
But that's what is killing them in the world. That's why everybody is going over to the other side, because the United States and Britain and France and others who have been going to Africa over the centuries have gone there as imperialists, have gone there as people who see themselves as superior. And you will notice that yourself when you travel there. I don't know if you've been yourself, Finbar, but I've noticed that myself in Africa, the way certain white people do treat people of color. And
I've seen that in India. I've been to India and I've seen how some Europeans living in India really enjoy and wallow in the caste system because they feel they're above all of the castes. And I've seen some horrific treatment on my visit to Old Delhi, really. They called it New Delhi. To mine, we stayed in the old part of the city. We didn't have much money, but I've seen that colonialist outlook and how it manifests in the treatment of other human beings.
But they will tell you, I mean, Africans, Latin Americans, Southeast Asians will tell you that when they're dealing with the Americans, that there's always the bit of a threat there. And it's not a joke, because they have hundreds of bases all over the world from which they can fulfill their threats. And they have done over the world. But that is what is changing. And that is what fills my heart with joy to see these countries that were colonized by these European master races, that these countries are getting their chance now. They'll catch up with the rest of us, and that long may it rain. The sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm just concerned about the desperation of the US empire as it starts to crumble and how it will react. And as usual, I suspect in a military fashion, unless somebody like Robert F. Kennedy.
You know what it will do? It will have people running around the streets of Dublin, Cork, Mayo, Donegal, Athlone, everywhere, dragging people off the streets to fight in whatever latest war they've concocted.
That is the big fear.
That's how it'll end up.
And Claire Daly was in the European Parliament this week, and she spoke about the European Parliament and Borrell and all those guys, and their declaration essentially that Europe's economy is now a war economy. We'll have a look at this video. We'll come back in a wee minute.
Thanks very much, President. So here we are, and the corks must be popping in the arms industry boardrooms all over Europe. A plan rushed through behind closed doors, no public consultation, no public debate, presented as a fait accompli, just waiting for our rubber stamp. A unilateral declaration by an unelected commissioner that Europe is now a war economy. Not a war on poverty or homelessness or on climate change, but a diktat to the public of Europe that they have to accept another €1 billion being laundered from their pockets into the fat wallets of the global arms industry. The workers in those factories have to suck up the suspension of the Working Time Act, and if they don't, they'll be brandished as traitors or Kremlin agents. And if that wasn't bad enough, it won't be just our arms industries, because our friends in the US and Israel can dip into the pot, flog off bits to their European counterparts who'll do the final assembly, put a stamp and a premium on it, and it's champagne all round. And why wouldn't it be? At €3,000 to €4,000 per shell, and the workers of Europe are expected to pay for 1 million of them. It's absolutely outrageous. If you really cared about Ukraine, you'd be pushing for peace. But the EU hasn't lifted a finger to push for peace in Ukraine. In fact, it's done everything to escalate the conflict and prevent peace. Because for the EU, it's all about the war profiteers. And the catastrophe in Ukraine is nothing more than a global opportunity for your friends. It's an absolute disgrace. It's about time you started to work for peace.
What do you make of that, John?
I think she's wonderful. I think she's the conscience of our nation, and not only of our nation, but the conscience of Europe. And it's lovely to hear her say it. And I see her on programs across the United States where they were saying, oh, if only we had someone like this. You know, we're very lucky.
We are very lucky. And she is inspiring. And she's one of the few voices, herself and another Irish MEP, Mick Wallace, who are standing up to what's happening in the EU, which is becoming a military project and trying to establish itself as a colonial empire once again. And it's something that the Irish people, I think, have always been viewed as abhorrent, this militarism, involvement in war, things like that. It's been a point of pride in the Irish nation. And that's not just my opinion and my experience, but it's what the polls have said time and again. But the Irish nation is under severe pressure to abandon its neutrality and to get involved in the Ukraine war. It's resisted so far that the government, and when I say resisted, the public have resisted. The government itself is gung-ho about the whole thing and would be delighted to. There was information released into the Irish media over the last week, and this is the kind of thing we find out 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. And it's in relation to the fact that Irish airspace was essentially handed over to the British military by the Irish government 50 years ago, and that policy has not changed one bit. Let's have a look at this headline. So this is from the Irish Times. Secret Anglo-Irish air defence agreement dates back to the Cold War era. Agreement remains in place despite concerns raised by ministers and military officers over the years. So Ireland's neutrality is really a threat, but have we ever really had it when we look at stories like this? Ireland maintains a secret arrangement dating back to the Cold War era, allowing the UK to police the country's airspace despite concerns about the accord being raised over the years by ministers and military officers, the Irish Times has learned. The agreement was drafted in the early 50s when relations between the West and the Soviet Union were at a low point, according to interviews with diplomatic, political and military figures. In the knowledge that the air defences has almost no ability to monitor or intercept new long-range strategic bombers being developed by the Soviet Union, the state entered into a formal arrangement with the UK in 1952, which would allow RAF aircraft to intercept hostile aircraft in airspace. If anybody wants to read the rest of that, you can get that online. I think the point is that Irish airspace has been controlled since the 1950s by the British. We're being told it's for our benefit, but in reality, it's an extension of British airspace itself in their mind so that they can collect data to create war. And that's what this seems to be about. What do you think, John?
Well, the first thing I would have to say is, where did this information come from? That's a key point here. Where did this information come from? Because I can recall throughout the Troubles, the British were always complaining that their helicopters couldn't follow anyone into the south, or that their planes couldn't use the south. So how come it wasn't available to us during the Troubles, but it suddenly has become available to us now? I'm a bit curious about that. But on the overall question, the biggest problem we have with neutrality is that our political leaders have as their end game nice, cushy jobs in Europe. To get those jobs, they have to do stuff. That is where our problem lies. And when you think about it, there are 28 countries in the European Union. 22 of them are in NATO. This means that NATO decides what the EU does. This has exposed a major flaw that we didn't realize existed as much as we do now. We certainly realize it now. but 22 countries can decide the fate of the EU, and they are all members of NATO, all the big ones. They're all members of NATO.
And you
So we're
also made
subject to that.
your point about where did this come from is quite interesting, because I think the inference there is that they're trying to fool the Irish people into saying, oh, sure, it's always been there, so there's no point changing it now.
It wasn't there during the Troubles. I can assure you of that.
Yeah. This seems to be a con job, possibly.
There's something very strange going on there, and the fact that it comes from the Irish Times would concern me.
Right, okay. And as someone who has had past links with the Irish Times, I think your advice should be taken on that, definitely. John F. Kennedy gave a speech 2 months before he was assassinated, President John F. Kennedy in the United States, saying that he was going to pull American troops out of Vietnam. He was shot within 2 months of that. His nephew, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is running to become the Democrat presidential nomination in the next US elections in 2024. He is talking the talk when it comes to the way John F. Kennedy spoke and the way his own father spoke, Robert Kennedy Jr., who was also assassinated for his views in the United States. I have here a commitment that John F. Kennedy's campaign has put out with regards to the war in Ukraine, but not just the war in Ukraine, war in general, and the way US intelligence services and secret services operate around the world. We're going to have a look at this because it's very, very similar language to both his father and his uncle, and we know what happened to them. Is this maybe third time lucky when it comes to Kennedy changing the world for the better? Bring it home from the Kennedy 2024 campaign.
Right.
In the long term, a nation's strength does not come from its armies. America spends as much on weaponry as the next 9 nations combined. Yet the country has grown weaker, not stronger, over the last 30 years. Even as its military technology has reigned supreme, America has been hollowing out from the inside. We cannot be a strong or a secure nation when our infrastructure, our industry, society, and economy are infirm. A high priority of the Kennedy administration will be to make America strong again. When a body is sick, it withdraws its energy from the extremities in order to nourish the vital organs. It is time to end the imperial project and attend to all that has been neglected. The crumbling cities, the antiquated railways, the failing water systems, the decaying infrastructure, the ailing economy. Annual defense-related spending is close to $1 trillion. We maintain 800 military bases around the world. The peace dividend that was supposed to come after the Berlin Wall fell was never redeemed. Now we have another chance. As President Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will start the process of unwinding empire. We will bring the troops home. We will stop racking up unpayable debt to fight one war after another. The military will return to its proper role of defending our country. We will end the proxy wars, the bombing campaigns, covert operations, coups, paramilitaries, and everything else that has become so normal, most people don't know it's happening. But it is happening. A constant drain on our strength. It's time to come home and restore this country. And there's a quote at the end from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. America cannot be an empire abroad and continue to be a democracy at home. And that's from the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What do you make of that, John?
He said, Robert says, you see this book I have here on JFK, The Unspeakable.
Yeah.
This is the book on Kennedy. I've read an awful lot of Kennedy stuff, but this is one in which Robert Jr. urges all Americans to read this book. I've started to read it, and it's wonderful.
Okay.
For anyone who was, I know I was around at the time he was shot, and I remember all the adults crying, and I didn't know what was going on. It was my first experience of anything of that nature. But it was a shocking experience in Ireland. We felt we had lost a king.
A modern day hero that is being slowly assassinated is Julian Assange. There's been an increase in the activity and the energy of the campaigns around the world to have Julian Assange released. from Belmarsh prison and not to be extradited to the United States, where he faces a horrible, horrible time. Not that he's having a good time at the moment. Here's a video of Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, talking about his feelings with regards to the continued incarceration of Julian and persecution of Julian Assange. We'll have a look at this and we'll be back in a wee minute.
É uma vergonha que jornalista que denunciou as falcatruas de Estado contra os outros esteja preso, sabe, condenado a morrer na cadeia e a gente não fazer nada para libertá-lo. É um negócio maluco, a gente que briga e fala em liberdade de expressão, direito de gritar, direito de... Ou seja, o cara está preso porque denunciou as falcatruas. E a imprensa não se mexe na defesa desse jornalista. Eu, sinceramente, não consigo entender. Não consigo entender. Eu até peço perdão, porque eu vou, quando chegar no Brasil, vou ligar para o primeiro-ministro, porque foi um assunto que eu esqueci de falar com ele. Eu já mandei carta para o Assange, já publiquei carta, já escrevi artigo sobre o Assange, mas eu acho que é preciso um movimento da imprensa mundial na defesa dele. Não é na defesa dele enquanto pessoa, é na defesa da liberdade de denunciar. O cara não denunciou nada vulgar. O cara denunciou que um Estado estava vigiando os outros. E isso virou crime contra o jornalista. E a imprensa que defende liberdade de imprensa não faz um movimento para libertar esse cidadão. É triste, mas é verdade. É verdade, a gente precisa colocar nossas teorias na prática de vez em quando, para que a gente possa poder continuar falando em liberdade de expressão.
So that was the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, on the continued incarceration of Julian Assange. Just to juxtapose that, we have Karine Jean-Pierre, who's the White House spokesperson, and she was asked several tough questions with regards to the hypocrisy of the United States calling for the freedom of journalists in other countries, and yet maintaining Julian Assange's imprisonment in Britain and planning to imprison him in the United States if he's extradited. We'll have a look at this video. We'll come back in a wee second.
One more press freedom question. Advocates on Twitter today have been talking a great deal about how the United States is engaged in hypocrisy by talking about how Evan Gershkovich is held in Russia on espionage charges, but the United States has Espionage Act charges pending against Julian Assange. Can you respond to that criticism?
Say, what is the criticism?
Well, the criticism is that the argument is that Julian Assange is a journalist who engaged in the publication of government documents. The United States is accusing him of crime under the Espionage Act, and that therefore the United States is losing the moral high ground when it comes to the question of whether a reporter engages in espionage as a function of his work. So can you respond to that?
Look, I'm not going to speak to Julian Assange in that case from here. What I will say is, and you heard directly from the president, when today in his statement on this anniversary, but also during the dinner where he talked about the freedom of the press and how important it is to protect journalists, because it is part of our democracy, right? It is important to have that if we want to have a democracy, right? It is part of how we move forward, telling the facts, being able to tell the truth, and be able to reporters to do that freely. And so the president's going to continue to speak to that. The president's going to continue to work to make sure that these Americans who are, again, held hostage, who are wrongfully detained, come home. And that is something that we have seen under this administration. He's been able to do more than a dozen times. And so you see this president's commitment in just this last 2 years. We put forward additional tools to do that, to deal with this matter. And so that's what I can speak to. That's what I can speak to the president's commitment on this. I'm not going to weigh in on comments about Julian Assange.
One final video that we have in relation to the US involvement in the continued incarceration of Julian Assange is a video of a press freedom event at which Antony Blinken, the US Secretary for State, was speaking. And this is the guy that has suppressed the information about the Biden family when it came out before the last election. This is the guy who spreads misinformation about countries right around the world with the intention of collapsing those countries, causing civil war in those countries, or attacking those countries, or sanctioning those countries. So this is this guy, Mr. Propaganda himself, and this is him facing the music at a press freedom conference.
In particular, I'm curious whether you've been able to talk.
Excuse us, we can't use this day without calling for the freedom of Julian Assange. The Biden administration stop the extradition request for Julian Assange.
2 hours and not one word.
Take it easy, take it easy, take it easy, guys.
Not one word about journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who was murdered by the Israeli occupation forces in Palestine. One word about
We're here to celebrate freedom of expression, and we just experienced it. Let me continue, Mr. Secretary, to ask you about Evan Gershkovich and your efforts to get him free. Well, first,
what do you make of the increased campaign to have Julian Assange freed and the hypocrisy that we have coming from the United States on this issue?
Yeah, I like what I see. I mean, at last we have an Australian Prime Minister who's pushing for it, and that has been a big change. And you will get lots of people who will have that similar opinion, but are a little bit scared. But when they see somebody taking the position, they'll go for it. You know, that's why it's important for people always to make strong points that they believe in, because there are others who don't make those points, but they will follow you if they think you're making the points they want to make themselves, but are nervous about doing so. Karine, I think, is a bit lost in her job, the poor thing. But for Julian Assange to be still in prison for reporting the truth, murderous truths about the American behavior in war, at a time when we are witnessing Europe in a mess because of America wanting a war again. He's at the center of all this. Yeah. Julian Assange is at the center of it all, of peace, of a better world. And I just hope he survives and isn't a broken man from what they've done to him.
I'm told that his physical health wasn't there. He had a mild stroke a short while ago. I'm told his mental health isn't there either. Some reports are coming out of him being observed, constantly banging his head off the wall. So for a man who's done so much for bringing a sense of humanity back into the media and a purpose for the media again, it's really sad to see. John, I just want to move on to the next story, and it's about the Biden family, and it's about the Republican Party, who are claiming that the Biden family have received at least tens of millions of dollars from countries and companies around the world in corrupt payments for influence schemes, including possibly Joe Biden himself. So this is members of the Republican Party who have communicated and looked at the documents given to them by whistleblowers, and now they want to get access to files that the FBI have, and that the FBI seem to be quite resistant to give them. We'll have a look at this. We'll come back in a wee minute.
The bank records show the Biden family, their associates, and their companies received over $10 million from foreign nationals and their companies. Some of that money came from a Chinese company and went to Hunter Biden's company. Other transfers occurred with the help of Rob Walker, who then sent it on to different Biden family members. This is not how lawful businesses operate. Chinese nationals affiliated with the Bidens created limited liability companies in the United States, and then in a short period of time transferred their interest to a Chinese company that sent money to the Bidens.
John, you and I really remember way back when the Bidens were being linked to dirt in Ukraine. Trump tried to raise the issue. He was called a liar for it. It became a central part of the last presidential campaign. What do you make of this?
Well, it's not just the Biden family. The Clintons are as bad or worse. They've made a career out of making lots of money from their office. They're all at it. You know, the senior politicians in the United States, the ones who've been around for a long, long time, who are at the top, have all been milking the system in the same way as the Clintons have and the same as Biden has and his family.
And the FBI seem to be protecting them, and there's a pattern of that now. You know, so the FBI protected them when the Hunter Biden laptop story came out, and they said that that was a fake story, that it was Russiagate. It transpires now that it wasn't fake, and that Anthony Blinken himself, as a senior campaign manager for Biden's campaign, that he went, he actually scripted a letter and got lots of FBI guys and retired FBI guys to sign that letter to say that this was a typical Russian operation. Turned out it wasn't. Hunter Biden's laptop and other electronic devices, the stories that came from them turned out to be all true. Joe Biden has been a liar from day one. Let's be clear about it. And he's lying right at the end of his career, and he was lying since the beginning. I have a video here highlighting some of the lies from his earlier career. We'll have a look at this. We'll come back in a minute.
Senator Joseph Biden dropped out of the hunt today, saying the disclosures about his plagiarism in law school and his exaggerations about his academic record made it impossible for him to continue.
I do it with incredible reluctance, and it makes me angry. I'm angry with myself for having been put myself in the position of having to make this choice.
The Delaware Democrat is the second candidate to be forced from the race by questions of character and integrity.
And we're just going to finish up our last story for this week. A sad little story. Mr. Macron, President Macron, President of France, took a traditional 8th of May cavalcade car and parade through Paris, but there wasn't one person out to see him. And it would appear to me that they decided not to have the public come out for once, because they're afraid of how the public will respond when we see how they've responded with riots right across France for the last few years, really. But it's coming to a pinnacle or a height now. We're going to have a look at this video. We'll come back in a wee second.
Emmanuel Macron remonte en effet les Champs-Élysées au moment où nous parlons. Et vous avez remarqué, comme je suis extrêmement obéissant, comme me l'a demandé mon rédacteur en chef, nous retrouvons tout de suite Anne-Sophie Varbon sur les Champs-Élysées. Anne-Sophie, vous allez voir passer dans quelques instants le convoi du président.
It seems, John, that the people of France are isolating Macron, and he's even isolating himself now. What do you make of that video? Is it very telling, or am I just getting too worked up over nothing?
Well, it's hard to know. It's a bit of a Norman Bates scenario there, isn't it? He's there on his own in a city full of people, and no one turned out to wave to him or to cheer for him. And he's the president of France. You know, even for a ceremonial occasion, you would think people would come out for a day out, a nice spring evening in Paris. But no, he's lost it.
I don't know. I don't know what to make. It seems that there are fundamental changes happening across Europe and around the world, and although they're not breaking out on the surface, you can sense them underneath the surface. Fundamental changes to the way we operate, the way we relate politically and socially. Do you get that sense, John?
Absolutely. I mean, the past 5 years now have been excruciating from the COVID point of view, the way they made a mess of that, the lockdowns that went on for so long and the damage they've caused. And then we're into Brexit, and now we're into a war in Europe. It almost as if it was part of a piece, you know, a number of awful things were happening. But I hope we're at the end of it now, because my feeling is that we're coming to the end of the war is okay line. Nobody believes anymore that it's plucky little Ukraine fighting against monstrous Russia. No one believes that anymore. It's the United States proxy war, one that they've planned for a long time, and they have the next one planned against China. We all can see that. We're not blind and we're not stupid. Okay, so the newspapers tell us to be blind and to be stupid and don't tell us any facts. But all of that will change, I believe, because you can't sustain falsehoods for that long. People will see the truth. They'll want a fairer deal, and they'll get it, because I think they've had enough of this.
Yes, I agree with you, John. If you look at in the United States, the potential for the next elections in the United States, presidential elections, you have a candidate in each party who's very well known, very popular, and they're calling for an end to this war and a pullout to this war. So there seems to be some hope there. We're going to close up, John. Anything to look out for over the coming week in terms of international news?
Well, I would suggest again to people that they might have a look at that JFK and the Unspeakable, the book that that Robert Kennedy advised people to read. It's an amazing book, and it will be the book of the year, I think. So I would go a little bit different this week, but I would say such is the febrile nature of the front line. Such is the pressure Zelensky is under to have some form of an offensive that anything could happen.
Thanks for joining us again this week, John. Thanks for tuning in, folks. This is our first edition of this particular program. Please like, please share, please subscribe where you can, and we'll see you next week.